What's up, folks? It's your boy Coach Ty back at you with another one, and in today's video we're talking about stretch-mediated hypertrophy and also partial versus full range of motion reps. These two things are connected and need to be talked about together. So let's get straight into it. Here we go. Now, in the majority of cases, when full range of motion and partial range of motion are compared to one another, full range of motion wins, and this is reflected across the majority of the research. Full range of motion wins for both muscle growth and strength and athletic performance purposes. One example of this is the squat. Now, you may have seen certain professional athletes, probably most famously LeBron James, doing partial squats. The logic here being that when you are going to jump when you're on the field or on a court, you're not going to do a full squat before you go into the jump. So doing a partial range of motion squat is closer to the task of jumping than doing a full range of motion squat. And while I see this argument and I get why people think it, it's been debunked by research. Full range of motion performs better for, like I said, both strength and athletic purposes as well. And muscularity has a lot more to do with athletic performance than many realize, and I should definitely do a video about that soon. Also thinking about doing some reactions to some professional athlete workouts, because in 9 out of 10 cases, they're terrible, and people are looking at it like, oh, this is a professional athlete, so the workout must be good. And no, most of these people are so gifted, like LeBron James, he could look at a dumbbell and will build muscle. That's how great their genetics usually are. But I digress. So that's it. End of discussion. We don't need to talk about anything else. Full range of motion is better. Well, let's get a little bit more specific. First, we need to define our terms. Partial range of motion and full range of motion are both pretty vague and nebulous terms, and many don't understand what either actually means. Most people assume that full range of motion is the amount of distance that the weight being lifted travels. So if you're performing a lateral raise, so long as the dumbbell goes from at your side to parallel with the ground, then full range of motion. I'm gonna quote Menno Henselmans here. One reason many people have trouble understanding range of motion is they think it is equal to the amount of distance that the body part or the weight travels. It is not. Range of motion is equal to the amount of degrees that a joint flexes. And in this particular context, when we're talking about muscle growth and strength, the most important part is the amount of degrees that the joint flexes against resistance. So carrying on with the lateral raise example, you don't have any tension on that muscle until your upper arm is at about 45 degrees of abduction, maybe a little less than that, maybe more like 30 degrees. And then the exercise is over at 90 degrees of abduction. However, your shoulder joint has a much longer range of motion than just that 60 degrees. So was that lateral raise full range of motion? Based on this definition here, no, not really. Also, when we're talking about partial range of motion, we need to consider where the partial is occurring. Are you doing partial range of motion on a squat at the top of the exercise, the first quarter of the exercise, like a quarter squat? Or are you doing the partial at the bottom of the exercise, like a pulse squat? And what difference does that really make? Now, if you've ever done quarter squats and pulse squats, you'll know quarter squats are pretty easy. You could load them up with a ton of weight and do them all day. Pulse squats at the bottom, loading those up with weight is extremely difficult, and your legs will be on fire pretty quickly. Now, why is this the case? Because at the top of the squat, if you're doing a quarter squat, the joints are not really flexing very much against resistance. They are, but to a very minor degree. Also, at the top of the squat, your muscles are much closer to a contracted position. At the bottom of the squat, there's a lot more resistance down there because your joints are further away from the line of resistance, which is vertically through the barbell, and also because the muscles are in a more lengthened position. Because your knee and your hips are around 90 degrees, both your glutes and your quads are in a stretch position, making the exercise much more difficult. and we arrive at stretch-mediated hypertrophy. Stretch-mediated hypertrophy we will simply define as the increase in muscle fiber size when seen as a result of lengthening a muscle under load. And under load is very important, and we're going to come back to that here in a minute. And there's a larger and larger body of evidence reflecting that not only is stretch-mediated hypertrophy real, but it may be even more effective than doing, again, full quote-unquote range of motion reps. Let's break down some of these studies. One recent study examined muscle growth in the context of different ranges of motion while performing the preacher curl. They had the subjects perform 68 degrees of range of motion at the top of the exercise with one arm and 68 degrees range of motion at the bottom of the exercise in the opposing arm. The arm that performed the exercise at the bottom of the range of motion saw significantly more muscle and strength gain. McMahon and his research team assessed strength and size in the quadriceps after having performed knee extensions for 8 weeks. They trained one leg in the contracted position and the other leg in the lengthened position. The researchers concluded enhanced muscle in vivo and somewhat insulin growth factor 1 adaptations to resistance training are concurrent with muscle stretch, which warrants its inclusion within training. Shigeru Sato found the same thing, but with the biceps. They found muscle size to have increased significantly more in the group who performed partial curls with the bicep more stretched, in contrast to the bicep that was trained in the more contracted position. Mayo, once again, found the same thing, but in the hamstrings. They compared the lying hamstring curl to the seated hamstring curl. The seated ham curl, as opposed to the lying leg curl, put the hamstrings in a lengthened position. The researchers concluded hamstrings muscle size can be more effectively increased by seated than prone leg curl training, suggesting that training at long muscle lengths promotes muscle hypertrophy, but both are similarly effective in reducing susceptibility to muscle damage. And quick side point about this particular study, both were doing full ranges of motion. The only difference here was one of the exercises trained the muscle at a long muscle length and the other one did not. Moving on, Cassiano did this for the calves, but also compared the partial ranges to a full range of motion. The researchers found that calf growth was more significant in the initial or stretched range of motion group over the final range of motion group, and the full range of motion group as well, demonstrating that stretched partials were more effective at building muscle even over full range of motion. A meta-analysis of 11 studies found the following. Evidence suggests that when training at a longer muscle length through either partial range of motion or full range of motion, some muscles, such as the quadriceps, biceps, and triceps, tend to experience optimal growth. Thus, the use of partial range of motion in the initial part of the excursion, in combination with full range training, should be considered when prescribing hypertrophy-oriented resistance training programs. Another meta-analysis done by Nunez and Schoenfeld took a bit more of a comprehensive approach than the previous studies that we talked about. In summary, they found that the non-loaded stretching did not confer any of the benefits of loaded stretching. So you need an external load to see the muscle growth we've been discussing. This throws out the idea of stretching after a set. I want to harp on this for one more moment. This is what I was referencing a little bit earlier about you need an external load. So just doing normal stretching exercises will not induce the hypertrophy that we're talking about. You have to be stretching the muscle under an external load. So training at long muscle lengths through the use of machines or dumbbells, barbells, whatever it might be, is the way to go, or doing partials in the stretch position is also the way to go. But doing we'll call it a normal exercise, even though I hesitate to use that terminology, doing a normal exercise and then doing a static stretch after the set seems to not confer any of the benefits that we're talking about. Finally, in 2021, Pedroso had 4 different groups of women perform the leg extensions on a machine. One group did reps in the initial range of motion or stretched, one group in the final range of motion or contracted, one group with a full range of motion, and one group alternated between the initial and final range of motion. Of course, each group got stronger in their specific ranges, and I'll talk a little bit more about how strength is applicable to all this in a moment. The stretch-only group gained the most muscle, which is For obvious reasons, very interesting. Based on all this, I would recommend doing exercises that again train muscles in a lengthened position. So seated hamstring curls, good mornings, and actually, let me not go there quite yet. I'm gonna give you a series of exercises here in a moment that will train your muscles at long muscle lengths. So you don't need to worry about what exercises do I need to do in order to see these benefits. And specifically for more advanced trainees, I would advise throwing in some lengthened partials at the end of a set. And I'll tell you why this is only for advanced trainees. Beginners don't need very much of a stimulus to induce muscle growth. They also fatigue more quickly, and they also take longer to recover. We also know from some more research that doing lengthened partials and training at long muscle lengths induces more fatigue than doing, again, I don't want to use the term normal, but normal exercises and reps. Let me just say reps that don't train the muscle in long muscle lengths. And there was a specific study, or a couple of specific studies, one that looked at this concept in the context of beginner lifters and one that looked at this in the context of advanced lifters. They found no additional benefit for the beginners and more of an additional benefit for, or a significant additional benefit for the advanced lifters. So again, this is backed by research. Now, really quickly, I would also like to talk about strength here because I think this is very important when we're talking about partial ranges of motion. Partial range of motion exercises have played a very significant role for power lifters and Olympic lifters for decades. For example, you've got the block press that will help with lockout strength, or a pause deadlift just out of the floor or just off the floor in order to help with the initial pull on a deadlift, or doing a pause at the bottom of a squat to help with strength at the bottom of the squat. Turns out the elite power lifters, surprise, surprise, they knew what they were talking about. And I've got 4 studies down in the description below reflecting this. This makes sense when you have an understanding of how strength works. Strength is much more task specific than many realize. A lot of people use the word strength and strong as a very general term, but again, strength is much more specific than people realize and is more of a skill than people realize. So say, for example, you deadlift more than I do and I squat more than you do. Which one of us is stronger? Well, technically, neither of us. I am better at the skill of squatting and you're better at the skill of deadlifting, so on and so forth. If you do a particular exercise for a long period of time, your nervous system will adapt and your body will become more efficient at performing that move, and therefore you'll get stronger. Okay, on to the exercises. Okay, so we're starting off with the hamstring exercises, and we're beginning with the good morning. So in order to stretch the hamstrings, we need to have our knees extended and to extend and flex at the hips. Or in this case, the most important part is flexing the hips. In that bottom position, you're gonna really lengthen the hamstrings. Same thing here with the Romanian deadlift. And on both of these exercises, you don't want to only just push your hips back, but also imagine you're pushing your butt up toward the ceiling. That's going to help you keep your knees mostly extended. We don't want to be fully extended at the knees, but mostly. And flat back as always. And moving on to the seated hamstring curl. Now you see me pull myself further forward on this. This is to flex my hips even more so I get an even bigger stretch at the hamstrings. Now the position that I'm seated in is very similar to the bottom of a good morning or a Romanian deadlift. The difference is obviously the knees are doing the movement and not the hips. We're moving on to our quad exercises. So you see me leaned all the way back on this leg extension machine. This is gonna extend your hips, and then we're flexing and extending at the knees to train the quadriceps. So put your leg extension machine pad for your back all the way back so you can lengthen at the hips. And that's primarily what we're aiming for with any quad exercise where we're trying to stretch the quads, is we need extended hips. So this is another variation, the sissy squat with a TRX assistance. And we're flexing and extending at the knees. And to make this exercise more difficult, you can walk your feet further back. To make it easier, feet further forward. And I've got an entire sissy squat video also if you want to check that out for more variations with the sissy squat Roman chair. Here's my final quad exercise for you. This is a standing leg extension. I call this the rolling leg extension. And you'll see why here in a second. So attach an ankle strap and put the cable anchor at your mid back. Now let your leg pull all the way behind you, and you're gonna feel a big stretch through your rectus femoris, flex at the hip, and extend at the knee, hence the name rolling leg extension. That back position there will really stretch out the hamstring, and then we're gonna get a decent contraction in, or excuse me, I said hamstring, the quad, and then we get a decent contraction in the quad at the front. For the calves, we really only have one option here for lengthening the calves, although we do have a bunch of different apparatus we can use. So you can use a Smith machine, you can use my personal favorite here, the horizontal leg press, but you are trying to keep your knees mostly extended because your calves do attach at your knee, so they need to be lengthened at the knee. And then we're going to let the weight push the toes further back, as far back as you can stand it, and spend a little extra time in that stretch position. This move is called the stretcher. This is the invention of John Meadows. You want to force your head through the window or between your two arms and let the weight pull on your shoulder joint. That's the lengthened position, so spend a little extra time there. Lean all the way back, and this will go from a vertical pull to a horizontal pull. And we've got the same thing here with the lat prayer. This is a Menno Henselman's exercise. I prefer doing this exercise kneeling instead of standing because it lets me use a lot more weight. But you're gonna lean forward, head through the window, let the weight pull on your shoulder joint, feel that stretch through the hamstrings, and then as you lean back, pull your elbows to your sides. Onto the biceps. So this is the Bayesian curl. You want to face away from the cables and put the cable anchor at about fist level. You're going to get a really big stretch in the back of the exercise, that position there. As you curl, lean forward. Because of the orientation of the resistance versus your lower arm, if you don't lean forward, the cable's going to smack into your forearm, which we don't want. So lean forward, and that's going to let you get a better contraction at the end. Incline curl. Now this is pretty much all stretch. So just let your arm hang behind you. Look for what feels like a stretch in the bottom of the exercise and then curl. This one's pretty simple. You've probably done this one before. Now this is the rolling tricep extension or the skull over. So we're going to perform a skull crusher. Push your elbows forward, let your forearm touch your bicep, then roll all the way back. That back position is really going to stretch out your tricep. And you'll roll your entire arm through. And yes, we'll use a little bit of momentum here because we're not totally focused on the concentric of this exercise, more so the eccentric and that position there, the stretched position. And of course, overhead tricep extension. Do your best to keep your elbows tucked in on this exercise. And again, at the bottom position, when your when your forearm touches your bicep, you should feel a stretch through the triceps. And our final body part we'll hit in this guide is going to be the pecs. So in order to adequately stretch the pecs, we want to internally rotate the shoulder and flare our elbows out when we're pressing. I'm using a slight incline here because when I arch my back, that's going to put me at more of a flat type of pressing angle. And look for what feels like a stretch at the bottom of the exercise. And then same thing here with this pec fly, internally rotated shoulders. So at the front of the exercise here, your thumbs should touch each other. And you want to flare your arms out straight to your side. the lower your arms go, so let's say you have a 45-degree angle between your torso and your upper arm, that's not going to do a very good job of lengthening your pecs. So you want to keep your arms high. Try to make like a T position in the back. And that's all of our exercises, folks. Thank you for listening and watching. I hope that was helpful. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share, and I will see you with the next one. Deuces.